Shalom, and welcome again to another exciting edition of the Torah Watchman Show International, hosted by yours truly, Hakam Yaar ben-Emmett. I have an interesting, I would say, documentary / lecture. I'll keep it short and not too verbose. And I want to, first of all, before I get started with this lecture that I titled The Historical Roots of Christianity. Now, I've done several videos about this. I don't want to say I'm an expert in history or a historian, even though this has been an enthusiastic hobby of mine for many, many years. As a Jewish person like me in America or any country, you need to know your ethnic roots. You need to know a thing or two on your history of your race, a history of your people. People say Jews are from Judea, Arabs are from Arabia, to each their own. But as far as the history of our country, my beloved country of the United States of America, in which I was born and raised as a patriotic American, I was taught history in school. Now, over the past, there has been, on the left side of the spectrum of politics per se, the 50 shades of gray of black and white truth, as I like to define it and quantify it, that they have attempted to revise history for things that they have emotional, negative kind of pain points per se. In other words, like the slavery in America, or the demon of our past and things that we're so ashamed of. But our history is never good or evil. Okay, it's simply what it is. Like the history that led up to the Holocaust, as horrific as the Third Reich was, and all the decisions in the 1930s that led up to horrific murder of 6 million of my people, including the great-grandparents of my family. Yes. But what I'm saying is you must know your history. You must know the history of your people, know the history of your host nation, know the history of your religion, and I'm going to begin with the history of the Christian faith that is the most varied religion on the planet to this day, with many, many different versions of their Bible, and literally 5,000 or more transcripts that led up to the composition in Koine Greek to the King James Bible around 1609. So we're going to get into the history of the Christian faith. I'm not picking on Methodists, Lutherans, Pentecostal, Assembly of God, Southern Baptist, Northern Baptist, Roman Catholic. Neither of those. I'm talking about Christian faith, okay? Why you believe in what you believe is based on someone else's assessment of the facts, something you probably were not taught in your church or your pastor or even your school. A lot of people go to Christian school, like Catholic schools and things of this nature. But it's up to that professor not to be biased in their own estimation of the truth, to give you the facts and let you decide what is the truth. So let's get started. Again, the title of this lecture is The Historical Roots of Christianity. Let's begin with the social economic catalyst, and I'm talking about approximately 4 BCE, that's before the Common Era, okay, through about 30 CE. This is the first sectional breakout. How did I get this information? Well, I researched it. And today in the 21st century, I use artificial intelligence. I use Google Gemini a lot, and I vet that because I could more quickly come up with a synopsis that I want, that's worth my time and effort and your effort for me to do a video like this. I can quickly parse that information through thousands of sites. I assess it and I look at it and see if it's sane, and see if it's worthy per se, and then I will check it out and fact check it myself to make sure it's not opinionated. So in this section here, the movement began in Galilee, as everyone knows who love their New Testament Bible, a region under heavy economic pressure. We can all agree what was going on during that time frame about 2,000 years ago. Now, the science of stratification. Roman Judea was a client state. The Roman Empire invaded Judea, okay, roughly toward the end of the Judo-Maccabean era, okay? We're talking about approximately 80 to 100 before Common Era, okay? That's about 2,000 in 80 or 100 years ago, okay? So a client state, a tribune state who paid taxes to the emperor. The population faced a triple taxation to Rome to the local king Herod. King Herod the First, okay, he was an architecture genius. He was also insane, and he was a murderer, okay? He was a horrific person, and you may say, well, one side of his family may have been Jewish. We believe that to be true, but he actually murdered hundreds, if not thousands, of Jewish priests that got in his way, that attempted to prevent him to be nominated as so-called king of Judea per se, but he was definitely a bureaucrat of the Roman Empire, okay? He murdered his inner circle of his family, but he was an architecture genius. He was responsible for the construction of the Second Temple, as we all know, okay? Now, so he was known for building the Second Temple. He was also known for building Masada. You've heard about that. And building the Temple Mount areas we know today for the 10th Roman Legion. They used to have a base of headquarters there. And that's why you look at the, 80 acres, 50 acres, I'm not sure the size, but the long rectangular Temple Mount area is much larger than you need, say, for King Solomon Temple. The reason why it's so large and long, because it had to incorporate two things. King Herod's Second Temple, which was positioned, say, on left and right on one end where Al-Aqsa Mosque more or less is, in that general area, and then you had the 10th Roman Legion was on the other side, and it's actually a more elevated area. This is on top of Mount Moriah. So the agreement to allow even a Jewish temple to be built there is that the 10th Roman Legion would have oversight over all those pilgrims that would come there to all the Jewish holidays 2,000 years ago in the time of Jesus, okay? And that's what I'm getting to, okay? Now, this created a large class of landless, displaced peasants, believe it or not, because you had the very filthy rich. They did not have the strata of economics that we have in our country, like you have the poverty, below poverty, middle class, and then upper high class, or the wealthy, the millionaires and billionaires of this country. So the situation back then 2,000 years ago, you either were wealthy and affluent, or you were pretty much completely illiterate, could not read, and then were in constant state of poverty and homelessness. So that's just the situation that was going on 2,000 years ago. And it was ripe, it was really ripe for a Messianic person to rise up out of that and try to entice people to believe and hope in something that they could not see, like an eternal kingdom in the near future, apocalyptic, trying to say delivery of the people in poverty and the victims underneath that tough, restrictive Roman rule, that kind of thing. The end of the world kind of idea. That's what that apocalyptic kind of prophet. And that's what we're talking about in the man named Jesus. Now, the founder of the Christian faith, everyone knows, historical data, all historical data, not just Christian biased data, I'll get to that in a moment, identifies Yeshua, not the man Jesus. Jesus was never used. Jesus is a Spanish or Latin word, derivative of the Hebrew word of Yeshua, which essentially means salvation of God. Yeshua is actually very close to Joshua, the general of the Jews in the time of Moshe. Okay, so Joshua and Yeshua are essentially the same name. It means the same thing: salvation of God. So as a rule, he was a rural artisan. Scientifically, he is classified as a charismatic desert teacher or apocalyptic prophet like John the Baptist. And there's actually, believe it or not, there's more historical evidence to prove that John the Baptist existed and everything that was told about him versus Jesus. I'll get to that in a moment. The execution of Jesus, okay, that touches so many Christian hearts during the time of Easter. And even the Orthodox or Greek Orthodox Christians in Jerusalem, you know, they parade someone with the cross of Jesus, the crucifixion and all of this. They parade that through Jerusalem, a very big event, and then the Vatican, of course, during Easter. Because a lot of these things are historical places on landmarks that supposedly, according to the New Testament Christian Bible, no matter what version you read, you know, it talks about these areas, okay? Golgotha and other areas like this, okay? The place that Jesus met with Pilate, when he met with King Herod or other people like that. And I'll get to this shortly, okay? Now, the execution, fact-based records, Tacitus, his annals, he was a great Roman historian, okay? Volume 1544, and one of his annals here, he said this, Pilate, he referenced a Pilate stone, okay? At that time, they had a stele, they call it stele or stone, a monument in which they recorded special historical events, special leaders on time, victories in the Roman Empire, the war and conquest. They listed these great leaders there, okay? We do something similar to that in America in the Founding Fathers and statues and things like that. But there was something called a Pilate stone. It confirms, no matter Jew or Gentile, whatever you think, it confirms indeed a Roman prefect, they call him prefect, Pontius Pilate. He essentially was the governor of Judea. He did not like the job at all, and no one did in that position. Ordered his execution in Roman law. What was the charge? What was the charge of Jesus? The charge was sedition, claiming kinship. You heard about the sign that was put on the cross, supposedly, above Jesus, King of the Jews? Well, King Herod was referred to himself as the King of the Jews, but he did not oppose the Roman emperor, but evidently the man Jesus did, okay? Well, this challenge the so-called majestas, or the majesty of authority, is a Latin word for that, of the emperor. According to Roman laws of that time, and nothing in here I read by this Roman historian said anything about Caiaphas or the Jewish high priest instigating the crucifixion of Jesus. It's just not in any non-Christian historical document that I could find, or even artificial intelligence, with all its thousands of calculations. And it actually used quantum computers, some of the fastest computers in the world, to reach these calculations, to give you the information to astute and logical questions you may ask. Number two, the evolution from sect to religion. We're talking about 30 CE, that's the Common Era, to 70 CE. Now, why are these times significant? Well, around 30 CE is when Jesus was supposedly, based on the Pilate stone. I'm not talking about the New Testament because that is a religious document. Okay? I'm not talking about the Jewish Talmud either. I'm talking about just secular historical document. According to the Pilate stone, Jesus was indeed ordered to be executed, and the form of execution, as horrific it was crucifixion, and many Jews were crucified in that time that were considered a threat to the emperor or the local magistrate within Judea. Okay? So he was accused of sedition around 30 CE. The reason why 70 CE on that time span is so insignificant, as you know, the second temple, King Herod, beautiful temple he built essentially for his own arrogance and not for the glory of God at all. It was a political statement he made. tried to win over Jewish support for his position that he titled himself as the King of the Jews. And he actually looked at Jesus as a political threat too. He looked at people in his inner family as a threat, and he killed them. He murdered them. He's a homicidal maniac. He really was. But anyway, 70 CE is when that beautiful temple was destroyed, because it was a center of Zionist insurrection against the Roman Empire, the 10th Roman Legion that was implanted there within Judea. They rose up against the Roman military government there. And essentially what the Romans did is not really germane. They put a statue or an idol of Zeus or Jupiter inside the temple. Or at least they tried to do it. So then the Jews made it a command post, and of course it was destroyed because of that. So that's why 70 CE is very significant. During this time frame, the word Christian or Christianity was not even used in the vernacular. And what was the vernacular at that time? Well, it was not predominantly Hebrew among non-Jewish people. It was Greek and Latin. It was mainly Kohen Greek. Was taken over. Eventually, it would take over one side of the Roman Empire that was split between the Latin part based in Rome, and in that section, and then in Constantinople and Turkey, in Africa, in that area, it was more Kohen Greek. Okay, so with that being said, the way in English translation, that was how you referred to the disciples or the followers of Jesus. So at this time, Jesus was crucified. His disciples were scattered and dead about his time. People did not live very long. And as a signpost here, consider Apostle Paul, who wrote his 13 letters epistles, predominantly to Greek churches in Corinth and Ephesus and Greece. Excuse me. And he wrote the letters to these churches there. He was dated around 50 CE. So he lived after Jesus. He lived after the disciples died. Just to get that out of the way. So about 50 CE, right up to the destruction of the temple, 70 CE, Apostle Paul lived and died, and he was accredited to at least 7 of the 13 letters they could read about in the New Testament, but they think that other people he had delegated out, because he was in prison supposedly, wrote on his behalf, like Timothy in the New Testament, okay? Not germane to get any further. But this is a Hellenist spread at this time. Greek philosophy, Alexander the Great, okay? Following the execution of Jesus, the movement moved along Roman trade routes via the Ignatia, via Appia, okay? I'm not good with Latin. Linguistic science, the adoption of Koine Greek, I mentioned this, was a technological breakthrough, it really was, in writing books, which were scrolls at that time. Spreading knowledge, and that's the whole thing of gripe with Alexander the Great, because there were so many pagan people, because they did not understand, they didn't know how to read, didn't know how to write, and learning Greek will help you to understand the great philosophers of that time, like Aristotle, and many other great Greek philosophers, Pythagoras, and things like this, okay? So it was a breakthrough. It allowed the movement to bypass Hebrew and Aramaic barriers and reach the entire Mediterranean basin. So at that time in Judea, most people spoke Aramaic freely among the people, and they spoke Hebrew only in the context of temple worship or maybe a synagogue, okay? Or in their communities for religious reasons. The role of Paul, which was known as Saul of Tarsus, okay, which is a Roman province at that time, as a Roman citizen, Paul utilized something known as the Pax Romana, okay, this is Roman peace, and protected status of Judaism to establish sales in urban hubs, in Ephesus and Corinth and Rome that I mentioned there. This is places he traveled to seed and plant churches throughout this area, to largely pagan areas, people that worshiped the gods of Greece and the gods of Rome and others at that time, or had no religion at all. So it's very interesting here, as a Roman citizen, he had benefits, he had fringe benefits, and then he came to be a Jew. Now, at the time of Alexander the Great, I don't get into a lot of detail, I have many videos about him, okay, he was very pro-Jew, by the way. He made Judaism an official religion that is accepted by the Roman Empire. But at this time, it was beginning to switch, and we'll get to this in a moment. Something known as the Great Rupture in 70 CE. That's the destruction of King Herod's second temple that he built, his legacy. The most significant factual turning point was the First Jewish-Roman War. The destruction of the temple in 70 CE, Roman legions burned Jerusalem. This destroyed the Jerusalem wing of the movement. It destroyed, incidentally, the Sanhedrin, which is the Levitical organizational court system of Halakha, since they, for whatever crazy reason, decided to build their court system inside of the temple of God, which I don't think is Halakha. Anyway, it's not kosher. That's another video. So the survival strategy, to avoid being targeted by Roman anti-Jewish sentiment, this is very important, please pay attention, and the fiscus judicius tax, a tax on every Jew, because they were beginning to be targeted, the Jews were being targeted. The movement began to emphasize the distinction from Judaism. In other words, the way, incidentally, were all Jews, mostly Jews. And you could refer to them as Messianic Jews because they thought Jesus was a great prophet, a great teacher. In the time, he talked about wonderful things. He read from supposedly the scroll of Isaiah. He was Torah sinners supposedly, and family were very religious people, Joseph and Mary. And if you follow the New Testament stories there and things like that, and take them literally and just accept it as a grain of truth. Okay, so with this being said here, is that the way was comprised of Jews that were following a new deliverer, which they thought was Jesus, and some people claim, I don't know if it's true, that many Jews became disappointed in Jesus and stopped following him because they found out he was very passive, just wanted peace, and did not want to create a military or rebellion per se against the Roman Empire, and they hated the Roman. It was horrible to live as a Jew in Judea during Roman occupation. Just get that out of the way, it's true. And there was a tax against the Jews. So what do the way these prerequisite Christians do? Well, they stop being Jewish. Just like Paul said, I'm Jewish when it's comfortable for me to be Jewish, to read some, and I'm not Jewish, I'm not kosher, I can eat pork chop with someone I want to reach on the other end of the spectrum. That's how he was a chameleon. So they stopped acting or behaving Jewish, or they just walked away from the way. And then the way was, who filled the delta and the gap there were Greeks. Greeks converted into that religion that was morphing and growing at that time. And that even Paul talked about the Judaizers. He talked about, in Revelation, you can read this, about the synagogue of Satan and all this. Well, this kind of diminished here, because if you were a Jew and you set up a religious environment there in your community, if it was predominantly Jewish, whatever village you stay, you had a bullseye on your back for the Roman Empire to double tax you. And that official religion status was diminishing quite fast during that time. So this is when the term Christian, recorded in Tacitus and Pliny, becomes a distinct legal category in Roman police report. The police report is when a Roman governor or magistrate called, essentially signed an arrest warrant to a Roman centurion, police force, whatever, to go and arrest someone and accuse them of sedition or causing problems with the peace, or causing problems with the bureaucrats of the Roman Empire, taxation purposes, to get interfered with that, okay? Now we'll get to Tacitus and Pliny in a moment, because these are two people that most Christians, most Christians today, historians among Christian faith, they refer to them as evidential proof of everything that the writers of the New Testament say to be true about the life and times of Jesus and Paul, okay? So number 4, the institutionalization of state adoption is very important. You have to have adoption to have the institutionalization.
If Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith.
How then can some among us say there is no resurrection of the dead?
This stretches from 110 CE, Common Era, to 325 CE. These dates are very significant. I'll get to this in a moment. Let's talk about some of these founding fathers from the Roman Empire to the Holy Roman Empire to Christian leaders and bishops and things of that nature. So Pliny's report in 112 CE, quickly, this provides the first scientific look at the Christian ritual, as I called it. Pliny, a governor, investigated them and found no crimes, only stubbornness and refusal to worship the emperor. Now, this is a paraphrase from what he actually wrote in his annals, and I'll get to exactly what he said later. Now, bureaucratic growth. This movement grew because it provided a social services, feeding the poor and burying the dead. Now, at this time, when you died, you just died there and rotted, pretty much. And if you were hung or crucified, your body just, became carrion for vultures and birds of prey. Burying the dead is a civilized practice, but you need money, you need a place, and everyone owned land and everything else is very expensive. So the prerequisite Christians actually were provided social justice and social welfare. And that sounds very good. They buried the dead. The Roman state did not offer this as a benefit, even though they taxed you, like for roads and arming and feeding their military. Okay? Now, the Constantinian shift, this is very significant, around 313 CE, Emperor Constantine, and if you're Christian out there, many of you may not know who this individual was. He's very popular in history. He did not just convert to the way of Christianity. He used the religion as a unifying political tool for a fracturing empire. What do I mean by that? Well, a system of control. The Roman Empire overgrew its britches because it was a worldwide domineering empire that took over, even went up to Anglo-Saxon England. That's how far it stretched. All roads lead to Rome, and actually roads that were built from England all the way to the Vatican still exist today in Europe, believe it or not. This is amazing, okay? But anyway, this Christian shift here, the Romans lost faith in the old Roman gods. Wherever you were called Jupiter or Zeus or not, whoever you worshiped, you had temples for them, you had so-called sacrificial offerings to them, or tributes to them, that kind of thing. Well, the people were not getting excited about that anymore, okay? They just were not interested in giving tribute to these gods. So the emperor was losing systematic control throughout the Roman Empire because he had no hallelujah chorus per se among his people. Okay? The emperor referred to himself as a demigod. Constantine referred to himself as having a supernatural virgin birth just like Jesus. This is not my opinion. You can look it up. Even Alexander the Great made that same kind of claim. So if you were a Godhead kind of figure, like the old Japanese emperor before World War II, if you were a godlike figure and you did not give any credence to any of the other upper gods in Echelon, Mount Olympus and everything else, you could study Greek mythology on this, understand what I'm talking about, then you're going to lose control, especially if your empire stretched way far to the east and to the west and north and south, and in Africa, all the way to England, and Spain, all the way to the Vatican, in Asia and everything else. It was just vast at that time. So they need a unifying political tool for a fracturing empire. So what he did, he incorporated what he saw the best of both worlds within the Christian faith. He saw they were meeting the needs of very poor. You need to win the hearts of the very poor to be able to get adoption over in your system of control. Okay, and it's all about controlling the people's mind, because Rome wanted to own the minds and hearts and souls of the people at that time to control them. You can only control them so much by killing them and driving them through the sword or threat of death. So the people did not live very long, about 27 to 30 years, and they died, and half their children died of the plague or disease. That's just the way it was. There was no antibiotics, there was no vaccine. People did not live very long. They didn't have much to live for. Okay, but if they thought there was a heaven or a brighter world around the corner through this man Jesus, who was a supernatural miracle worker, according to the tales and legends by Apostle Paul and other writings who eventually became the New Testament Bible, okay, then you had something to hope for. You need light at the end of the tunnel. And this is what Constantine saw in his vision statement for the fracturing Roman Empire that was literally almost in civil war, breaking apart. I always said from east to west, okay? So he moved the movement from the basement house churches in hiding, literally hiding, okay? Because they didn't have official status yet, into the basilica, the Roman administrative halls. So he essentially said, I'm a Christian. In fact, he went on a great military battle, I cannot remember which one, and he claimed to see the cross of Jesus in the heaven, and he said he heard the voice of Jesus, very similar to what Paul said, I heard Jesus speak, and everyone else heard thunder. He said he saw that, and he was baptized with water or whatever, sprinkled or whatever, before he died, but he said is, I'm a Christian now, I'm with the way, and everyone in the Senate, Roman Senate, will believe and become a Christian and be baptized with me, or you will be exiled from the Roman Empire or killed. So you would lose your job if you didn't have it in your resume. I'm with the way, I'm with the emperor's new Christian faith. That's what it was. Now they have structural evidence here, again, in brief synopsis and reaching some sort of conclusion here. You have the physical death that was documented in physical stone. Just write that off as a historical fact. The ritual practice, the door uropals, this is archaeology. The earliest known house church showing simple communal structure was found. And this again, this was the Messianic Jewish churches were the very first churches that were established in Judea, in the very beginning. Legal records, the Trajan's rescript, it's an official Roman legal policy on how to trial and execute Christians, okay? Arrest warrants and things of this nature. Social makeup, which is Celsius. He was actually a pagan critic. He recorded that the movement was largely made up of wool workers, cobblers, very poor people, fishers of men per se. You know, Peter was an ignorant man from Galilee, and all he knew was to fish and sell fish in the market. Laundrymen, confirming its base in the lower echelon of the labor classes, okay? We're talking about very deep blue-collar workers. So this was the social makeup. Now to introduce these historical leaders that most Christian philosophers and theologians, PhD people, refer to this day as proof that everything that's said in the New Testament is true and accurate based on historical evidence. Okay? The Roman historians and officials, we talked about Tacitus, lived from 56 to about 120 CE. Widely regarded as one of the greatest Roman historians. He wrote in his annals about Christus, a specific annal that he was writing about the prosecutor Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius, how he was executed, okay? However, quote, quote, Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our great procurators, Pontius Pilate, okay? And a most pernicious superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of evil, but when in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center of and become something popular. So he was not very favorable of the way or the Jesus movement at that time. Now, Josephus, most people have known Josephus, okay? He was a great Jewish historian. He was not an observant Jew. He probably never went to synagogue or temple. I don't know. He never really talked about his faith. He could not. Why? His actually name was Flavius Josephus, after Flavius Titus. And he married, I don't know if it was one of Titus's daughters or someone high up in royalty or in the echelon of government there. He was considered as a Roman citizen, per se, based on his appointment by the Roman Empire to be a Jewish historian, actually to be a historian for the Roman Empire, but he was born Jewish, but he actually was quoted on the writings of Josephus. Essentially talks about the Judean Maccabee Revolt, and also he wrote some historical annals of the judges and kings of Israel and things of this nature. Okay? Now, however, if you read, and buy it on Amazon, buy the writings of Josephus, you see a paragraph supposedly that Josephus wrote. Okay? Now, most Christians quote this as proof. Hey, you got a Jew that lived before 70 CE that wrote about the life of Jesus, the same thing that the authors of the New Testament wrote about it, so it had to be true. Believe your own Jew, right? Well, not quite true. Now, what he wrote, according to Christian, he was a brother of Jesus who was called the Christ, okay, and he had disciples. That's what I read this. I have a copy of this in my library. However, most scholars today believe the original version written by Josephus was likely neutral or even a slightly negative. He probably described Jesus as a wise man or as a teacher who gained a following and was executed by Pilate, essentially a historical footnote to explain why the tribe of Christians still existed in his day. Josephus was an unobservant Jewish historian who was a bureaucrat that worked under Flavius Titus. Josephus was a Roman citizen, and saying something favorable about Jesus, in other words, if he quoted Paul about what he believed about Jesus, the Son of God, the King of the Jews on this, it would be considered treason. He never said anything favorable to impugn his reputation, business reputation, for his appointment as official by Titus. Titus appointed him as one of their great historians. He would be accused, arrested, and thrown in prison for treason. Another individual by the name of Pliny the Younger, he lived from 61 to 113 CE. While serving as a Roman governor, he wrote a letter to Emperor Trajan, okay, describing how early Christians would meet before dawn to sing hymns to Christ as to their God.
We gather before the door to sing.
Now, according to Christian accounts, that's what he said. However, Pliny the Younger did not have a favorable opinion. Based on many historical peer reviews of his writing, he viewed Christianity as a depraved, excessive superstition and a threat to the Roman social order. That's what his true statements were, not what I just read you. As the governor of Bithynia, Pontus, modern-day Turkey, around 112 CE, Pliny wrote a famous letter to Emperor Trajan seeking advice on how to handle the growing number of Christians in his province. In other words, they were considered a problem statement for control, for their uprising and their popularization movement among the poor, the blue-collar workers of that time. Now, an individual by the name of Saturius lived from 69 to 112 CE. In his work, The 12 Caesars, he mentioned Christius, as common misspelling of Christus, as an instigator of disturbances among the Jews in Rome during the reign of Claudius. And that was a true statement. Why? Because the Jews and the way, or the early Christians, were competing for favored status as an official recognized religion of the state during that time. Jews were falling out of favor. Christians accused the Jews for killing their Messiah. Well, the Messiah became a center focus point for Constantine, who was a new converted Christian, as his so-called representation of his God that he worshipped.
This unrest is your fault. Crestus is a blasphemer!
He brings truth. You cling to the past.
Silence! By order of Claudius, this stops now.
Now, the voting process, very interesting here. The participant, okay, approximately 318 bishops attended. At that time, they called converted Roman officials as bishops, while most were from the Eastern Empire, Greek-speaking. The Roman Latin-speaking legates were present to ensure the Western Empire's interests were represented. Again, there were almost a civil war or division between East and West. Vatican versus Constantinople, that kind of thing. And Constantine had a group of people meet there in Asia Minor, Turkey, that area, to make a decision on how their theology would grow and be accepted.
Therefore, let us vote on the true relationship of the Son to the Father.
The consensus was, they literally voted. They voted, up or down, raising their hands to vote, however. The vote was nearly unanimous. Only 2 bishops refused to sign, but Constantine warned them, if you don't sign on to this, if you don't trust in this, you will be considered a threat to my leadership, and you could be arrested and lose your job. However, this was achieved through Constantine's presence, so he came in and pushed over the vote through his threats, and he made it clear for those that did not sign would face imperial exile, and they did not want to do that because they were high up, as far as high-level aristocrats, okay, bureaucrats. So the language, the bishops used precise Greek philosophical terms, so the writings of the New Testament time were predominantly in Koine Greek, not Latin yet. So the homoousios, meaning of the same substance, to build a legal definition of the Trinity. The Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, was never instantiated in the original New Testament Bible. When I say original version, I'm talking about like the Sinai Bible.
Look here, Father. The Epistle of Barnabas and the Shepherd of Hermas. This changes everything.
Which is known as the oldest Bible, Christian Bible, in existence. It was discovered fairly recently, okay? It's fairly recently, I think, along Mount Sinai, okay? It was a Christian monastery there, and they found it there, by an historian, a Christian historian found it there. But anyway, the Mount Sinai Bible does not have many of the stories that you read about in the New Testament, because it's a root source, alpha source, and it was considered more accurate than, say, your King James Bible today, okay? So the Trinity was voted on. The Romans who were told you need to approve Christianity as official new state of religion, we're not going to believe in the Greek God, the Roman God anymore. That's not part of it anymore. That's not our theology. That's not our religious experience for you, We're not going to go to those idols anymore and offer sacrifice and stuff anymore. Or you're going to follow, say, Apostle Paul, okay? You're going to follow this Bible. So they told him that, okay? But for them to adopt the believement, they didn't teach them you need to believe in the one true God of the Jews, because like Marcion believed, and not germane to get into that, there was an evil God and a new God. So Jesus versus the God of Moses, essentially. So forget the God of Moses, forget the God of Jews, believe in the God of Jesus, God, the Son of God, and the Holy Spirit, the Trinity in one. So you get, essentially, you believe in a demigod, the Jesus Godhead per se, in which you had more than one entity that you could worship. There was more appealing to a pagan and polytheistic majority of people in the Roman Empire than believing in one God. That was just easier for their Hellenist mind to wrap around, ritually. Okay? Now, what the vote created. Horrible things for the Jews, Good things for the Jew, for the Christian. The council established three primary legal pillars of the state-authored religion. The Trinity, the decision that the Son was not a separate created being, but co-equal and co-eternal with the Father. But in their prayer, you would pray not just to God of Moses anymore. You would pray to God of Jesus, his Son, through the Holy Spirit. That's just the way it was, okay? This became later known as the Nicene Creed, which was the adopted Christian constitutional beliefs that all churches would follow in the future. It was a later invention. The term Trinity was something voted by this 133 bishop, and Nicaea. They went to Nicaea and voted for this, okay? Also, the first coined by the church father Tertullian around 200 CE. So he actually coined the Trinity before it was considered and voted on by 325 and later CE, Common Era. More than a century after the last books of the New Testament was written. You heard what I said. More than a century after the last books of the New Testament, when Apostle Paul finished writing his epistles, the 13 epistles, the 4 synoptic gospels are written, and to this day we don't know who wrote them. They're anonymous authors. In other books like the Revelation, John the Elder, 1st and 2nd John, other things, we still debate who wrote these, but anyway, they were written before the beginning of the 1st century. I mean, they were written actually. Revelations was written between 90 and 100 CE. This is not my opinion, this is history. Okay, just carbon dating of papyrus and things like this. This is just what it is. So after this time, 100 years after, say, the book of Revelation by John the Elder was written, you had Tertullian, who wrote in his book about the Trinity concept. And there's some vague references to that. I think in the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh, and that was Jesus and all this. It was not spelled out that way, but it was voted on as their halakha for Orthodox Christianity during the time of Constantine. Okay? So the language of the origin, the term is rooted in Greco-Roman philosophy rather than original Hebrew or Aramaic thought. This is very dualistic, Zoroastrianism, and that goes back to the belief of the earlier Persian Empire. King Cyrus in that time, going way back, before Alexander the Great. Now, the absence of the comma Johannism, what that means is one of the most significant features of the Codex Sinaiticus, the Bible Sinai Bible, is the absence of 1 John chapter 5, verses 7 to 8. That was added much later. We have proof that the Holy Roman Empire, these bishops, later on, much later on, hundreds of years later, added this to an existing canon that was supposedly divine scripture and locked by the writers of the 4 Gospels and Apostle Paul. They added that to have a very clear reference there after the fact, because they controlled the Koine Greek, they controlled the Greek manuscripts, they controlled all the language, they controlled all the writing. They were literate, and majority of people in that Greco-Roman world were illiterate and they could not read. Okay, that's just the way it happened. So which in later Bibles, like the King James Bible version, explicitly mentioned the Father, the Word, and the Holy Ghost as 3 that are one. 3 different parts, but are one. Okay. Historians have confirmed that this verse is a later insertion, a forgery. When you say a forgery, you go and alter an official text. In the future, you change something, you revise history. What I said in the very beginning of this lecture here, that you attempt to rewrite history for your political narrative to be true. Okay, the end of diversity. The vote effectively outlawed Gnosticism, the other cults, the minor cults of that time. Arianism outlawed it. Okay, no one supported it. Constantine did believe it, so it was outlawed. Okay, He's a Roman emperor, a demigod, he had the right to do that. So in the other variation of the faith, these outlawed Judaism as an official language. These groups were stripped by their right to meet, and their books were often confiscated and burned. The United Date of Easter, they voted to decouple the Christian holiday from the Jewish Passover. There's a lot of debates about when was Jesus betrayed by Judas. Was it the first day of Passover? Was it the day before Passover? Now had a video about this. It's very confusing. But decoupled it from Jewish Passover. They didn't want the Christian holiday to have anything remotely to do with very sacred Pesach, or Jewish Passover, which always occurs in the spring between April and May. Okay? So they decoupled that. It was also in reference to a creed that they signed, tax-exempt status, and the power to act as judges in civil cases. So they gave tax-exempt status to those people that followed the emperor, Constantine, versus those people that were off in these little cults, and Judaism was considered a cult as a variant, okay? So structural alignment, the church reorganizes boundaries to match Roman provincial lines. Okay, the Bishop of Rome eventually gained more power because he was located in the administrative heart of the ancient Roman Empire. Okay, the scope of the allowed theology, the council focused on creating a uniform legal definition for the religion to ensure it would function as a state-authorized entity. The creed, they produced the Nicene Creed. Please pay attention to this, it's very important. This was essentially a term of service for the religion. If you didn't agree with the specific creed wording of the creed, you were legally labeled as a heretic. And that means the death penalty for you, folks, not just losing your job. The calendar, very important here. They voted to standardize the date of Easter. To do that, previously different regions followed different calendars. They had the Julian calendar, Gregorian calendar, and Babylonian calendar, which Judaism follows. Okay, so Constantine wanted the entire empire celebrating on the same day to simplify Roman administration. So there was adoption of the Gregorian calendar instead of the Jewish calendar, which was based on solar and lunar cycles. Exile as enforcement. Once the vote was finalized, Constantine used the Roman military to exile dissenting bishops that would lose their protected Roman citizen status, like Arius, and burn unauthorized texts. This is considered heresy. Does that sound like what has been done in the not so distant past, by Christians and non-Christians alike? You burn books that you consider heresy if it doesn't support your political opinion. Just think about that. Freedom of religion, freedom of expression, public speech. Yeah. So they formed a police state power. It was used to enforce a specific religious doctrine that Constantine enforced by threat of life and death. In conclusion, thank you for your attention. I love you so much. I don't want to offend anyone here. Please check out the facts. I tried my best not to be opinionated at all. I hate my opinion because I'm not always accurate. I'm 61. I've lived a long time on this earth, thank God, and I have a graduate degree in science. I've been highly educated, but I don't know everything. I use the vehicle of artificial intelligence to parse thousands of sources to come up with this information. I will let you know right away if I say anything by my opinion. The final assessment. In a reality-based history, Christianity was a survival movement, and essentially what it was. If you wanted to eat and not starve, if you wanted to bury your parents who just recently died of a disease, then that was a survival movement in uncertain political time. 2,000 years ago, people did not live a long time. And if you didn't die of the sword, you died of disease and pestilence or starvation, or famine, okay? It started as a response to Roman economic oppression, heavy taxation, okay? Survived through the adaptation of Greek language and Roman logistics. If you were a Messianic Christian at that time, per se, and you spoke Koine Greek, you were considered a friend of the emperor. To consider that, okay? Koine Greek was a language of Christians, early Christians at that time. That's why all the New Testament is written in Koine Greek. The original 5,000 manuscripts that we have access to and archives and museums now, that's why it was written in Koine Greek. Only later was it written in Latin and eventually written in Anglo-Saxon English in the King James Version Bible about 1609. Not important, okay? So it was becoming a mirror of the Roman administrative system itself. Just like Alexander the Great wanted to convert Judea into Hellenistic philosophy and Koine Greek and institutionalize that, Constantine actually made that happen in reality, okay? So you saw the morphing evolution of the Roman Empire, which is heavy pagan in its roots, based out of Rome, becoming the Holy Roman Empire, and eventually the Roman Catholic Church, which is still based out of Rome through the Vatican today, okay? So look at your church constitution. If you're a Southern Baptist, go to the Dallas Theological Seminary, check the headquarters belief, ask your pastor for the constitution of your faith, then get a copy of Nicene Creed, and you'll see a very close correlation between your church constitution and a Nicene Creed that has it spelled out in there about the Trinity, okay? So if you are Assembly of God, if you're a Methodist, if you're a Lutheran, okay, Presbyterian, whatever faith you are in a Christian, as what it is, look up your church constitution. Look on your church foundational beliefs. If your church does not have that documented and is not proud of what they believe in, I would run away. You may be in a cult. Why? Because there's nothing legally to hold them accountable, right? But most churches have a constitution of belief. Read it, and then compare it to Nicene Creed to some of the things historically I've reported in this lecture, and you may be surprised where your roots originated, okay? I'm not here to judge you. I'm not here to judge your eternal soul. This is not about me saying Judaism is the best religion ever created. Well, it was never created. It was given to us by God to man, okay? But beyond that, all the facetiousness and joking aside, this is an historical representation of the truth. Facts-based, based on his historical leaders, things that Christians claim they said, against the reality of what they actually said, based on what's documented in books and that you could purchase on Amazon or eBay, other places, okay? Like, you can go to bookstores, you can go to your public library and look this up for yourself if you want to know the facts. Or if you want to accept just things by faith all the time, you could find yourself, if you're not careful, in another Jim Jones cult or a Waco cult, and you see how these things turned out, okay? There are no cults among Judaism I'm aware of. No cult at all. Cults are rabid among the Christian faith because they're not rooted in a constitutional framework of liability to keep people trusting in something that's adopted by someone but beside themselves or their pastor. Okay? But all kidding aside, stop hating, if you're a Baptist, stop hating Roman Catholics. Roman Catholics, you own Christianity. And I've heard many rabbis say before that the Roman Empire did not become Christian. Christian became Roman. And essentially it's true, historically saying. Anyway, God bless you. Shalom Aleichem. Hakam Yara ben-Emmett, signing out to the next time. Listen, I am the inconvenient truth. I shoot from the hip. I am not paid to lie to you or distort the truth. If I'm wrong, ever wrong, I put a retraction immediately on my videos and apologize profusely to you. I have an honor system here of being truthful. Most Jews should. Because if I misconstrue the facts and I say I'm a Jew, I am taking God's name in vain, and I would never do that. Shalom Aleichem. Take care. May the knowledge and truth and love go forth throughout the world. And if people don't want to hear your truth that's fact-based and information you want to share. There's only one true God of Israel. Our Shema and everything is very clear. There's only one God who gave me my soul and gave me my sentience, or to be hanging by a tree limb as a monkey. Thank God I am sentient so I can be grounded on truth, right? So God bless you. Take care. Signing out into the next.
If you've enjoyed this program, please click like and subscribe.